Hi everyone, welcome to the December 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host Craig Wilkowski. Well, this week on the show we're going to do a brief recap of last weekend's racing, just highlighting a few stakes races that I think are worth talking about. The Tenacious at the Fairgrounds, won by the returning Maxfield, a race that I know turned a lot of people's heads, and a horse that I think many are looking forward to in 2021. We'll also discuss the Grade 3 Mr. Prospector at Gulfstream, a race that we mentioned on the TimeformUS Forecast last week. And then we'll discuss some performances that achieved some noteworthy speed figures in the Queens County at Aqueduct, and also a 2-year-old race in the Springboard Mile at Remington. And then after that, we're going to dive into the Eclipse Awards. Craig and I will have a little bit of a debate and a discussion about some of the Eclipse Award categories. Probably not too much of a debate because I imagine we agree in a lot of them. Only a few seem like they're really up in the air at this point. But we'll talk about that and how we're viewing our ballots come the end of the year, because we're just a few days away from the new year in 2021. So, Craig, let's start things off with talking about some of those races, and I think we saw some nice performances this weekend.
Yeah, we did for sure. I actually got to see one in person on Friday, and then there were several on Saturday, of which we're going to talk about a few. And I guess we should start with Maxfield. He's still undefeated after I think this was his 4th race. He did it pretty easily. Watching the race visually, I mean, I wasn't blown away, but I did realize the pace was pretty slow, and that it wasn't too hard to figure out when Maxfield was just a half length off the lead after that opening quarter mile. We do have the fractions coded in blue, but I did like seeing the versatility from him and that he got out of the gate well. He's usually been pretty far back in his races. And to my surprise, the figure actually turned out to be a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is a career best for him, and continues his pattern of progressing in every start at least 5 points. This was actually the minimum. So he's moving in the right direction. I'm not sure what the future holds. I heard some Pegasus talk. I guess we'll see when they come out, but he certainly didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you make about the running style that he used in this race, because he had been more of a closer, and in some cases a deep closer, in his prior races. And I was watching the pre-show at the fairgrounds before this race and watching the horses warm up. And I mean, I'm no expert in horse flesh, but I think anybody could see that Maxfield was just extremely keyed up on the track, both in the paddock and then once they got out on the track in the warm-up for this race. I mean, he was sweating up a little bit, and he was just prancing, just never stopped moving before the race. And it's not a real surprise when a horse who's behaving that way shows uncharacteristic early speed when the gates open. And that's also not unusual for horses coming off the layoff. They can get a little keyed up, and I think that's what we saw with Maxfield, because he really dragged Florent Geroux up into that forward position. It's not like Florent was asking him to get up there. And he still finished off the race the way that you'd want to see a horse do on his return. I'm not sure that this was the toughest race in the world. And like you said, the speed figure was okay. I know some people would expect to see better from him in subsequent starts, assuming that he continues progressing. But this was certainly a good starting point for him.
Yeah, it was. And again, I mean, I have no knocks whatsoever on the performance. I don't think that the trainer would want him fully cranked up and, trying to run a 130 first time out for a smaller purse. So, yeah, I got no knocks on this one at all, and I expect a better effort next time.
Another horse that I think we can look forward to in 2021, assuming that he stays in trading, I've seen nothing reported to the contrary, is the versatile Sleepy Eyes Todd, who won his 2nd in a row when he took down the Grade 3 Mr. Prospector at Gulfstream on Saturday. And there's just a lot to like about this horse. He seems to perform at any racetrack, any distance, really any running style these days, as he came from way off the pace in that prior start at Keeneland. And again, he came from off the pace to win here and beat a pretty good field of sprinters.
He did. He beat a couple graded stakes winners in here, and did it, in workmanlike effort, which is usually what he does. And he's just a really cool horse. He's run at so many different tracks this year. I can't even remember all of them. I know it started, he ran at Fonner Park and won. He's won at Charlestown. He's won at Gulfstream. Won at, I think it was Keeneland where he won last time. And just a really cool horse. I've become a fan of his since he ran 2nd at huge odds in the Oklahoma Derby last year. And he's done very little wrong since. I mean, he tried that Santa Anita handicap where he didn't run very well, but otherwise, he's just the kind of horse I can get behind.
Yeah, and the performances of the horses behind him I thought were fine. Firenze Fire, he ran his race, but he ran his typical speed figure that's just under the 120 mark. He's hasn't really gotten back to those gargantuan speed figures that he would run on occasion for Jason Service. But again, this was another solid effort from Firenze Fire. I thought Irad Ortiz gave him a good trip from off the pace. We had talked about the pace scenario in this race when we handicapped it on the forecast last week, that it just looked like there was not a ton of speed on paper, but there were some pretty fast horses in the mix, and the fastest of the fast was definitely Wind of Change, who was sent out on a mission in this race. He really pushed them early. The others just had trouble keeping up, and things did fall apart a bit at the end, but Wind of Change actually held on pretty well to just miss third.
Yeah, he was a horse I actually mentioned on the forecast, and I probably squandered a little bit of my bet on Sleepy Eyes Todd because I did put a few bucks on him, and I was kind of rooting for him there for a little bit because I don't know that it would have been much different at the crazy odds he was. But just last thing on Sleepy Eyes Todd, that's a really strong race he came out of last time. He actually finished ahead of True Timber, and we know he came back to win the Cigar Mile, so that's one worth keeping an eye on.
Moving on to another race for the older horses at Aqueduct. This one was a non-graded stakes, the Queens County, going 1 1/8 on the main track. And Backside of the Moon, who to me was a little bit surprising that he was the price he was in this race. I assumed he'd be somewhat co-favored with the runner-up here, Musical Heart. He was a decisive winner of this race by open lengths and got a pretty eye-catching speed figure, but there was a situation at Aqueduct on Saturday that I think was really benefiting horses that got the kind of trip that he did.
Yeah, that was quite a ride to be fair to his rider, Jose Lezcano, who just gunned him out from the start, took advantage of a good break. And I mean, we're talking about an 8-year-old here who was in his 47th lifetime start, and he'd never been in first after a half mile in a race in his entire career. And only once was he that close in a 6 furlong race where he was at the 6 furlong point in a race. So, I mean, you have to give the jockey all kinds of credit when you see something like that, because this is just something the horse has never shown. He wound up with a 128 Timeform US speed figure. I don't know how much stock I want to put in that. It's not like I'd want to see him. Somebody commented on Twitter, Pegasus next. I don't think he's ready for something like that. Sometimes circumstances dictate speed figures as much as the horses themselves, but I don't want to take away from him. He's a really cool horse that we've talked about on the show before. He just always seems to run his race. It's just this time he ran a new top, which you don't often see at this age, but really good story, but not one I would likely expect would be repeated.
No, he's just a really cool horse. As you mentioned, he's an 8-year-old. He's run 47 times now. He won one minor stakes in the past, I believe. Maybe it was the Jazzle Stakes back in 2018 or something like that. But he's a horse that just always shows up regardless of what barn he's in. He's run some good races for Rudy Rodriguez, who he's with now, but he was even a good horse for Leo O'Brien when he began his career in that barn going back to 2016, 2017. So he's just a horse that always runs his race. Now, there is the situation of the track and what I perceived as the track bias on Saturday at Aqueduct, where in my opinion, horses that rode the rail had a distinct advantage, especially in races that were going longer distances like this one. And going the 2 turns, I think any kind of rail bias is always more pronounced because you have horses saving ground around both turns and riding that advantageous inside path. And as you said, Backside of the Moon got a great ride by Jose Lezcano, but also he just outbroke the field. Like, he almost beat the gate. I wanted to watch the replay of the start again in slow motion because it almost seemed like he might have busted the gate open before the starter hit the button, but he just timed it perfectly. And credit to Jose Lezcano, though, for not taking away that advantage that he took away from the start, because many times riders come out with a plan like, oh, I have to have my horse in a stalking position, so I've got to wrangle him back even if he breaks well. But Jose Lezcano is not the kind of rider to do that. He typically plays the break and allows a horse to go forward. That's what he did with Backside of the Moon. As for that 128 Timeform US speed figure, it's cool to see a horse like this run that kind of number. I have my doubts that he can do it again, given the track bias situation that I think he took advantage of. But still, he's just an easy horse to root for and a nice one to follow. Let's wrap things up in terms of the race recaps with the Springboard Mile from last Friday at Remington Park. This is the one that Craig was referencing that he saw in person. And I caught this race on Saturday. I didn't stay up to watch it on Friday night, but I was watching the replay in the morning the next day. And this was a pretty cool thing to watch. This horse, Senior Buscador, who was making just his second career start. He can't get out of the gate. He lags behind the field early, but boy, does this horse have some kind of finishing kick on him.
Yeah, this was a horse I did another podcast with my buddy Gino Bacola, and this horse was 15-1 on the morning line, and I made him my top pick just based on his debut. I never really thought I'd get 15-1, to be honest, but he was a horse who won first time out. He was dead last over 10 lengths behind with just about 2 furlongs left, and the horse not only won, he won in a canter by a couple lengths, and it was a case where he got a 98 speed figure that day, but I had very little doubt he was going to stretch out just fine. I knew there was improvement coming, but I wasn't expecting improvement to a 116 Timeform US speed figure, which puts him right at the top of the 2-year-olds that we've seen. I think Jackie's Warrior maybe ran a point faster in one of the sprints, but otherwise he's right there with all the rest of them. And I mean, I'm not sure what to make of this horse. He doesn't get out of the gate, as you said, in both starts now, but maybe that's just his style. It might be that they don't want to mess with that too much because he seems perfectly happy loping along at the back. And once he gets rolling, I mean, it's just an eye-catching kick. You could see midway on the turn that this horse was going to win easy, and he was still well in the back of the pack. And just one of those races, we don't get a whole lot of Triple Crown Trail potential when we see the Springboard Mile. I know it gives points. It's a very few amount, and a couple horses have made it to the Derby, but no serious contenders. But who knows? This one really looks like a runner for Todd Fincher.
Yeah, and the speed figure came back pretty impressive. I mean, that 116, that compares very favorably to the other 2-year-olds that we've seen, even in the major Grade 1 stakes races, like those that competed in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And I have no reason to doubt this figure. I know some of the horses in behind him are making that switch from turf to dirt, like Cowan, who was second, and Outador, who finished farther back. So, I mean, maybe you could wonder a little bit what was behind him in this race, but, I mean, it looked to me like a legitimate number, kind of just glancing through the charts from this day. And I mean, you can't deny that this horse was visually impressive, so that certainly supports the notion that he ran a fast race. He won by almost 6 lengths.
Yeah, and they ran, I think there were 6 races Friday night, and they were all dirt routes, all right in a row. And all the speed, it was really easy speed figures to make. The really good Hunk of Burning Love won the last race right after one. This one got a 119 Timeform US speed figure, which is basically what he's been running all year long when he routes on dirt. I think he's won about 6 in a row in that kind of condition. So I don't really have any issue with the speed figure. It was super easy to make, and I just think we're talking about a legit horse here.
Yeah, and I should mention, this horse also has the pedigree to be a good one because he's a half-brother to Runaway Ghost, who is another good one for the same connections, Todd Fincher. And the owner, he was a winner of the Sunland Park Derby from a number of years ago, but won a bunch of other stakes races in New Mexico. This one's a Kentucky bred, but a half-brother to that horse. So certainly it seems like the sky's the limit for him based on the way he started his career. Okay, let's move into the second part of our show on this Tuesday, and that's going to be a discussion of the Eclipse Awards. I know both Craig and I received our little packets in the mail, and I've taken a glance through it, some of the contender past performances, some of the stats on the owners and jockeys and trainers. So we'll get to that in a little bit, but let's just start by talking about some of the categories within the divisions, and I guess it makes sense to start with Horse of the Year. There's a pretty solid contender, I think. The leader of this across all the divisions would have to be the Breeders' Cup Classic and Kentucky Derby winner, Authentic. It seems like he's probably the leading contender for this award.
Yeah, I don't even really have anybody I would consider a close second, to be honest. There just wasn't a whole lot of super strong campaigns out there this year. Part of that, I guess, was because there were a lot of broken schedules due to the COVID-19 and a bunch of paused racing schedules and schedules thrown off. But in any year, it's going to be hard to beat a Kentucky Derby BC Classic dual winner. So I think he's the obvious choice for that one.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, as we go through some of the other categories, maybe we'll come upon some horses that could be in the top three or be finalists for Horse of the Year. But I think it's pretty clear that Authentic is far and away the favorite for that award, and I imagine both Craig and I will be voting for him. Let's just go through the categories as they're listed in this booklet that we got. I don't think either of us have to spend too much time talking about the Steeplechase Award. I mean, number one, I know a lot of people don't even like to cast votes in this category because many fans of thoroughbred racing aren't really following the steeplechase horses. And furthermore, there was just an extremely abbreviated season this year with them not being able to race in the springtime and not running some of those hunt meets in the fall. So they really just had those grade ones at Saratoga, and it seemed like Moscato, who won one of them and was third in the other, he seems like the leading candidate for that award, but I don't think I have too much else to say about that.
No, we agree on that one. It's the same one, but yeah, there's just not a whole lot to go on. I had to think about why the nominee list looks so short, and then I realized there were very few races run, so I think we can move on to the next one.
So in the 2-year-old male category, obviously the Breeders' Cup winner is always going to be the favorite for this kind of award, and that's certainly the case with Essential Quality, who's done nothing wrong. He's undefeated in his 3 career starts. He beat his main rival, Jackie's Warrior, in that race, and I mean, in my opinion, the only 2 legitimate contenders for this award are Essential Quality and Jackie's Warrior, and as much as I respect Jackie's Warrior's credentials and like him as a racehorse and think he actually ran a great race in the Breeders' Cup, he's just not the kind of horse that you can vote for in this kind of Eclipse Award category.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think accomplishments matter more than, what we think. And some people actually think maybe Jackie's Warrior ran the best race or a better race than the winner. But regardless, to me, when I vote, I'm looking at who won the races for the most part. So I had to go with Essential Quality there. I have Jackie's Warrior second. And I think we make 3 choices. I haven't officially put my vote in because I do want to wait for the races at Santa Anita this weekend. But the others I would consider Dr. Shivel, Brooklyn Strong, but I'm probably going to go with Fire at Will as my third pick, just for winning that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. He also won the Pilgrim, and it's a close call, but I think that's where I'm going to land.
Yeah, I've got no problem with those, and I feel like I'll land on pretty much the same 3 in that order. So let's move on to the female version of that category, the 2-year-old fillies, and again, we got a similar situation where we had some horses trade punches throughout the year. The horse that won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies and did it pretty decisively was Vequist. She beat her rival from the Frizette, Day Out of the Office, whereas Day Out of the Office had beaten her in that prep race, the Frizette. So they're 1-1 against each other, but Vequist won the more important race. So feels like you kind of have to side with her unless you're looking at the turf horse, Aunt Pearl.
Right. I would use your exact same logic. That's why I picked Vequist first. They split grade ones, but obviously the Breeders' Cup carries a little more weight. So I put her first. I'm a little bit torn on who I'm going to put second and third between Aunt Pearl and Day Out of the Office, just because Aunt Pearl has also won a grade 1. She won a grade 2. And not just that she won them, she was very impressive, ran really nice figures. So my hunch is I'm probably going to put her 2 ahead of Day Out of the Office, but I'll have to think about that one a little bit more.
Yeah, and I understand how some might want to argue that Aunt Pearl is worthy of winning this award because she's never lost a race. She's really untested in her 3 stars. She beat some very good Europeans in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies turf. I tend to side with the dirt horses, though, unless that's in a very weak category or unless there is some reason that there is not a clear leader on that side of things. Otherwise, I'm going to side with the dirt horses over a turf horse. But I have total respect for Aunt Pearl. I'm very much looking forward to what she can do next year.
Yeah, I mean, really on credentials, I guess you could make the argument for Aunt Pearl, but I'm with you. Dirt racing is still the most important racing in this country, so it's always going to get a little extra credit with me.
Moving on to the 3-year-olds, we already went into Horse of the Year and Authentic's strength there, so I don't think it's any surprise that he looks like the overwhelming favorite to win this 3-year-old male category.
Yeah, not much to add to our first thing. And I think my second vote's pretty clear cut as well. I think it's Tis the Law for sure. He had the most impressive campaign and honestly was up there for horse of the year had he somehow pulled off the Breeders' Cup Classic, but he didn't show up. But I still think he had the second best year. And then for third, it was really tough. It kind of drops off in a hurry after that. I landed on Domestic Spending tentatively. I'm a little leery to go to the turf horses, but just nothing else was jumping out at me that had a better record this year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other ones that you could consider for those spots underneath are horses like Nadal, who had his campaign cut short but looked like potentially the division leader early in the year. And then you've also got a horse like Happy Saver, who just has that one Grade 1 performance, but it was a win against older horses, maybe a suspect field of older horses in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, but he's a horse that is finishing the year undefeated. He's more so one that I'm looking forward to when he comes back in 2021. He's not really a horse that I would consider as a leading candidate for this Eclipse Award, but as you said, it kind of does drop off after Authentic and Tis the Law as far as accomplishments go with these 3-year-old males.
Yeah, Nadal, he just wasn't around long enough for me. The other one, Happy Saver, is definitely the other one I was considering for third.
Okay, things get a little more interesting as we get into the 3-year-old filly category, because I think you've got a decision to make. There are two legitimate candidates in Gamine and Swiss Skydiver, and Gamine obviously was the more brilliant campaigner. She ran some gigantic speed figures. She won her races by open lengths, did it very impressively, but all of her Grade 1 wins were around one turn. And then you got Swiss Skydiver, who didn't win as often as Gamine, but she did win many races. And while she's coming off a poor performance at the Breeders' Cup, she still is the Preakness winner against the males.
Yeah, I landed on Swiss Skydiver here. I certainly considered Gamine, but as you said, all her wins came around one turn. And I don't want to talk about it a whole lot, but she does have that cloud over where she had a couple positives this year, albeit none of them were in her stakes wins. One was in the Kentucky Oaks and one was in an allowance race. But even without those, I was going with Swiss Skydiver. She ran all year long. She shipped all over the country. She won arguably better races, including the Preakness. She was second to the boys in the Bluegrass Stakes. So for me, she's the top pick with Gamine second.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes Eclipse Award voters get a little bit too caught up in just the last race that these horses ran, which is often the Breeders' Cup. And the Breeders' Cup does carry a lot of weight, but I feel like sometimes certain voters allow it to overshadow the campaign that a horse had leading up to that. And Swiss Skydiver had quite a campaign. I mean, Kenny McPeak ran her 10 times. She won half of those races, 2 Grade 1 wins, but 5 graded stakes wins in total, and having won the Alabama and the Preakness against legitimate horses. I mean, it shouldn't go without being mentioned that she beat Authentic in the Preakness, and he's going to be the horse of the year. So I think that accomplishment really does trump what Gamine did around one turn. I'm not so much considering that cloud hanging over Gamine that you mentioned. I get it, and I know that some put a lot of stock in that reporting and those positive tests. As far as these accomplishments go and evaluating horses for these awards, it's kind of a similar situation to what we dealt with Maximum Security last year when he was the 3-year-old male winner. Personally, I feel like I kind of have to lay that stuff aside. But regardless of that, I feel like Swiss Skydiver, her accomplishments just slightly trump Gamine's.
Yeah, no problem. And I certainly am not eliminating Gamine, as we'll talk about a little later on.
And moving on to the older dirt male category. In this one, we actually had some horses who put in some nice campaigns, but I think there is one standout, and that is Improbable, who won 3 Grade 1 races this year, which is simply more than anybody else.
Yeah, that's about all we can say about him. He was the best of a so-so lot, I guess is all we can say. He did also ran second in the Breeders' Cup Classic, which is better than second in your typical Grade 1. I thought he ran just fine in there, and to me, he's a complete standout in this division. I just don't see anybody else, but in one where it's going to be kind of, I mean, I don't think it'll be open. I think he's going to be the clear-cut winner, but I want to say I do take the second and third choices I make pretty seriously because you never know in some of these tighter divisions. Even the horses you pick second and third, your votes can kind of be the swing vote in here. So for second, I went with Vacoma. He had a abbreviated season, only ran 3 times, all sprints, but he was perfect doing so. He looked good. It was unfortunate he wasn't able to finish off the year, but I still think he had more than the rest, more on his resume than the rest of the field. And the other horse I went with, just based on his Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, was Nick's Go. And normally I would not pick a horse like him. I think it was the only stakes race that he ran in all year, but it just shows how much the records of the others are lacking in here.
Yeah, I agree with you that Improbable is the standout, and it is a little more difficult to make those second and third choices, but I'm on the same page. They are ones that I take seriously as well, and I'm leaning in the same direction as you. I'm considering those 2 horses. The one other that I'd throw into the mix is Global Campaign, because he does have that Grade 1 victory in the Woodward, and he was third in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and I do take in-the-money finishes in races like the Breeders' Cup Classic pretty seriously when you're trying to make decisions among horses that have similar credentials, because in finishing third there, he did beat many other horses who would be candidates for this award or the 3-year-old male award. So he's a horse that I think can be considered underneath, but Improbable does look like the right one to win this award.
Yeah, you make a good point there. I want to say about the Breeders' Cup. Well, I mean, we have a lot of Grade 1s in this country, but I do think you have to give extra credit to the Triple Crown races and the Breeders' Cup races, just because that's where most horses are pointed the very best. So when you finish second, third in those races, it's almost like winning a Grade 1, just a regular Grade 1.
Moving on to the older dirt female category, kind of a similar situation to the males, where we had some horses put in some nice campaigns. Included among them were Midnight Bisou, Cece, who won a couple of Grade 1s early in the year, Fighting Mad, who looked so good over the summer out in California, Serengeti Empress, who was a terror on the sprint circuit. But at the end of the day, none of those can really compare to a Breeders' Cup Distaff win, and that's what Monomoy Girl achieved, and she's just Monomoy Girl, which means she always shows up, always wins the races that she's entered in, and she started 4 times this year, won all of them. It's just hard to knock that kind of campaign.
Yeah, it is. She's the clear-cut winner, I'm sure. Just a couple others. You mentioned them both. I'm putting Midnight Bisou second. Obviously, she had an abbreviated season, but I'm giving her credit for that Saudi race where who knows, maybe she'll be eventually declared the winner. But in any case, she ran a very good second in what was, I think, a $20 million race against the boys. So I did count that when it went into my thinking. And then for third, I haven't really decided yet. It'll be between Serengeti Empress and Valiance, probably Valiance for me, who really came on at the end of the year, won that Grade 1 Spinster, second in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. So that's where I'm leaning.
And I suppose some people might consider casting a vote for Monomoy Girl, maybe not as the winner of the Horse of the Year award, but one of those horses that should be a finalist. And I could understand that. I typically go for horses that, if they're fillies, they're ones that have run against males, if I'm considering them for Horse of the Year. But in a year like this, with a lack of clear-cut options that should be contenders for that Horse of the Year award, I can see casting a vote for Monomoy Girl as one of the 3.
Yeah, I would think almost. I think she's probably odds on to be one of the final 3, just given the racing we saw this year.
Moving on to one of the more debatable categories, I think, in the Male Sprint Award. You've got the Breeders' Cup Sprint winner, Whitmore, obviously, but it has to be pointed out that was the only Grade 1 victory this year for Whitmore. Before that, he had been a little disappointing. It seemed like he might have been off form. He did win 1 Grade 3 early in the year in the Count Fleet. But this is a category where you've got a lot of horses with either just 1 Grade 1 win or 0. The only horse that really stands out among those is Vacoma, who won 2 Grade 1s, but one of them was at a mile. So you kind of have to weigh a bunch of factors and make some sense of it.
Yeah, right now this is one of the categories where I want to wait to see the race on Saturday. I don't know what Nashville would have to do, but I would feel a little odd casting a vote right now without seeing how he does. He obviously doesn't have the accomplishments of some of the others, but also Charlatan is in there, and it probably won't change my thinking, but I do want to hold off. Maybe somebody wins by 15 lengths and runs a monster figure, and it wouldn't take a whole lot more than that this year to for me because it was an underwhelming group this year. I'll probably get the wrath of some of the horse people out there, but I'm not picking Whitmore first. I'll probably go with him second, and I'm going with Vekoma. I think he was the better horse this year. He won the three races, two of them in grade ones. I do tend to count the one turn dirt miles as sprints. That maybe that's a little debatable, but I've always done it that way, which basically means the cigar mile and the Met mile can kind of count towards that sprint division. So for me, I landed on Vekoma.
I have no problem with that. I have not decided yet, like you. I'm unlikely to pick a horse coming out of the Malibu, no matter who wins that race, because I just think they'd still be a little light on accomplishments unless the performance is just so overwhelming that it stands out as one of the fastest of the year. I guess in that situation, I might consider it. We'll see, because some of the horses in there are capable of running very fast races. But among the those that have run already, Whitmore's a little tough to pick because he did get that Breeders' Cup Sprint win. He was 18-1 that day. His prior accomplishments were hardly befitting of an Eclipse Award champion, so I'm always reluctant to lean so heavily on the Breeders' Cup and ignore some of the accomplishments of other horses that have won more grade ones. And as you said, Vekoma has. He's got that Carter and that Mile win, and those were accomplished against legitimate fields, and the Carter was by 7 lengths. I know it was in the slop, but he beat grade one fields in those races. So I could really consider him. I haven't made up my mind yet. I suppose you could also look at a horse like Volatile, who kind of like Vekoma had a career and campaign that was cut short. He ended at 3 for 3 this year, but he only has that one grade one win in the Vanderbilt, and that just not quite measure up to Vekoma's 2 grade one wins. I think the others are kind of hard to make a case for, so we'll see what happens in the Malibu.
Yeah, I do want to say for now I have Firenze Fire third, and it's just kind of he's a horse I've really grown to like. He ran well again this weekend. I always used to root against him because of the Jason Service factor, but I just think he's been a real warrior. He's shown that he does have some talent since he moved to the barn at Kelly Breen, and he just keeps running well. And he won a few races this year. He ran third in that Breeders' Cup Sprint, so he's the one I have penciled in third.
Yeah, and I should mention the other horse that I guess could merit some consideration is CZ Rocket, because he does have multiple graded stakes wins and was second in the Breeders' Cup. He just lacks a grade one win, and it's always tough for me to endorse a horse that hasn't run a grade one race. I know that that's sometimes at the discretion of the graded stakes committee, and some of the grade twos seem as strong as a few of the grade ones that we run during the year, but I've got to go by what they're actually rated.
Yeah, and I'll add as the speed figure guy. I haven't talked much about speed figures, but I do consider them a little bit when I make my picks in here. And the Breeders' Cup Sprint was it was the weakest Breeders' Cup Sprint I remember, which kind of led to me demoting Whitmore down to second, I guess, a little bit. And similar with CZ Rocket, he hasn't won a grade one, and the races he did win came back really slow. And I could even say that for Volatile, who was really impressive in the non-graded stakes or non-grade one category, but the one grade one that he did win before he was retired was just that race with the crazy slow pace, and it would just be hard for me to elevate a horse that was his only real win, where it was a race with just no pace. He was able to walk on the lead and hang on to win.
Moving on to the female sprint category, things get a little clearer because it seems like it's going to be hard to deny Gamine this award after the performance that she put in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I mentioned earlier. I mean, it's not like I would never vote for Gamine because of some pretty minor positives, I would say. I think she earned the award. She was definitely the best sprinting female. So I made her my top pick. And I thought the other choices were pretty clear, too. I went with Serengeti Empress in second. She was clearly second best in that Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. She ran some really good races earlier in the year, winning or running second in some sprints. So I have her second, and I went with Glass Slippers, the turf sprint winner, who is actually just a really good horse, but it would be hard to elevate her higher, for one, because it's a grass sprint, which just isn't the same level of, people just don't consider it as highly as dirt. And It's just one race. It's just one of the weaker divisions we have. So I couldn't put her any higher than third due to that. But I have no doubt she's a true grade one filly.
Yeah, we have similar thinking here. I frankly just went with the exact same trifecta in that order from the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint. Gamine, Serengeti, Empress Bell's the one. The last two, they just have one grade one victory, but I think their surrounding accomplishments make them worthy of being finalists in this category, and Gamine just seems like the clear winner. Moving on to the Male Turf Award, and this is another one of those that I think is a little bit up in the air. There are many possible contenders, I think, because you had a wide range of horses win at least one grade one race in this division, including a few 3-year-olds who did so. Personally, for me, I would narrow things down to Channelmaker, Order of Australia, who won the Breeders' Cup Mile, and Zulu Alpha, who started out the year as the leader of this division, winning the Pegasus World Cup Turf. Obviously, he didn't finish out his campaign and kind of tapered off a little bit. But to me, they seem like the three with the strongest accomplishments.
Well, we're pretty close on here. I think I'm probably going to settle on Channel Maker just because if memory serves, he's the one with the 2 grade one wins. He did it later in the year against good fields, and he did it on a yielding and a firm turf course. So that's who I'm probably going to settle on in first. Zulu Alpha looked like the second best to me, so I have him as well. Where we slightly differ, the third horse I had was in Still Regard, just because he had that win in the Manhattan, a good second in the Fort Marcy. But once you get down to third, I think you're kind of splitting hairs. I could probably come up with about 5 horses that I could pencil in third. I even considered Factor This just because of the sheer body of work, how many times he ran and how many races he won this year. But yeah, that's a direction I'm going on. You did mention the 3-year-olds, but I didn't really consider any of those just because they weren't really competitive against older horses and didn't run particularly fast.
Yeah, I agree with you about Channel Maker. I think he's the right pick in this category. As you said, he's got those 2 grade 1 victories, and I mean, he ran a fantastic race in the Breeders' Cup Turf against 2 of the best Europeans to come over to this country in the past couple years, Tarnawa and Magical. He just missed finishing second in that race. He just has the strongest accomplishments. He's faced the best fields, and he's run the fastest speed figures. To me, he just looks like the right pick in here. And we pretty much agree behind him. I mean, Zulu Alpha, I would definitely use him second or third. The one other horse that I would throw into the mix, I guess, is United. He does lack a grade 1 victory, but he is just a head shy of winning 5 grade 2 races this year. They were all in California, but he was the clear leader out there, and he obviously didn't run his race in the Breeders' Cup. I know he had a slight stumble on the far turn and wasn't really persevered with at the end of that race, so I'm willing to kind of forgive that. And, I've never been the biggest fan of United, but I can't deny that in this category, among those that are left, his accomplishments do stack up pretty well.
Yeah, I kind of forgot about him just because of the lack of a grade 1. But when I think about it, I don't think they run many grade 1s at the longer distances in California. So I did want to mention that was a good point you made about the Breeders' Cup for Channel Maker, because that was actually the deciding factor for me, was how well he ran in the Breeders' Cup on top of those 2 grade 1 wins.
Moving on to the female turf category. It's kind of a similar situation where, like Order of Australia could be considered a contender for the Male Turf Award, although Craig and I don't really consider him one that we'd want to vote for. There are definitely some females that you can vote for that came over from Europe to win Breeders' Cup races, those beating Ordaria, and probably more likely to win this award, Tarnawa, who won the Breeders' Cup Turf and did complete an undefeated season, having prior to that won 2 Group 1 races in Europe. Among the Americans, I think it's pretty clear the leading candidate is Rushing Fall, who did not win her Breeders' Cup race, but she did just miss in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. And prior to that, she did win 2 grade 1 races.
Yeah, I'm one that I don't always like to go with a horse who just ships over and wins one race, albeit the Breeders' Cup race. But I thought Tarnawa proved she was clearly the best, so I went with her first. I mean, not only did she win a Breeders' Cup race, she beat the males doing so. So it would be hard for me to pick somebody else. Maybe if Rushing Fall had a longer campaign with a few more wins, I could have done it. But unfortunately, she didn't. She only ran 4 times. So I landed on her second. And granted, those 4 races were great. Her 3 wins. And I would argue she might have been best in that Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf at a distance. It was maybe a hair longer than she wanted to go, but no knocks on her whatsoever. I definitely will put her second. And then the only one left for me was Adaria. I put her in third. Similarly, she only ran the 1 time, but she did come over and beat our best.
Yeah, I always struggle with things like this, whether to pick Rushing Fall or Tarnawa. I have no disagreement with you that Tarnawa ran a fantastic race in the Breeders' Cup Turf, and that performance certainly trumps anything else that any other filly in this category has run. But I do kind of lean towards the viewpoint that this is an award, the Eclipse Awards. They're generally for the American horses, and as long as there's an American horse with legitimate accomplishments, I try to give that horse the benefit of the doubt. So I think I would lean towards giving it to Rushing Fall. Like you, I wish that she had one more Grade 1 win. I wish she had run a race like the First Lady at Keeneland in the fall and collected another Grade 1 win there, because she does just have the 2. But what I will say is that Diana that they ran at Saratoga, I mean, it doesn't quite measure up to the Breeders' Cup because it didn't have the European participation, but that did collect some of the best filly and mare turf horses in the country for that one race, with Mean Mary and Sister Charlie finishing behind Rushing Fall, as well as Starship Jubilee, who also has her own credentials, not necessarily for this award, but she was one of the favorites in the Breeders' Cup filly and mare turf. So I could give it to Rushing Fall, and I think I would lean in that direction, though I really can't fault anybody who gives it to Tarnawa, because I do get that viewpoint as well.
Yeah, and I have no problem with anybody that leans in the other direction. For me, it was about a 51-49% call. I mean, if Tarnawa wasn't in here, I would pick Rushing Fall over Adaria, as I did for second and third. I don't want to bank it on one race. So yeah, no problem with anybody picking Rushing Fall, and I won't be surprised at all if she wins.
Let's finish things out by briefly discussing some of the human categories, mostly trainer and jockey, because I think those are the easiest to make decisions about. I know things get a little trickier with some of the criteria we use to determine things like owner, breeder, and apprentice jockey. As far as the trainer award, I think there are some clear candidates. I don't know if there's a clear front runner, and you can highlight many of them by looking at the leaders in earnings this year. I mean, obviously, Steve Aspex's stable had an amazing year, racking up more than 400 victories, over $19 million in earnings. He is the leading earner among trainers. But you've also got Brad Cox and Bob Baffert, who had a fantastic season with a smaller stable. And you've got Chad Brown, who's won this award in recent years, I should say. Perhaps Chad Brown didn't have the strongest year for his barn, but I guess he's a contender once again. And then you've got some others you consider that are lower down the list, but I think the ones I just mentioned are the favorites.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed them all. I being the math geek that I am, I tried to come up with an algorithm where I considered overall earnings, I considered Grade 1 wins, I considered graded stakes wins. And even doing that, it kind of put Steve Asmussen out of the top 3. So I don't know if this is how I'll go with my votes or not, but for now it's where I'm leaning. And I kind of scored him with Chad Brown getting a narrow advantage over both Brad Cox and Bob Baffert. I'm going to take a deeper dive and looking more at the individual horses, but for now that's where I'm leaning, because it's not just it's not an award I want to give out for somebody that wins, with 1 or 2 horses. They win a whole bunch of races, and as you said, it may have been a down year for Chad Brown, but it's a really good year for anybody else that most trainers would love to have. So for now, I'm leaning Chad Brown, Brad Cox, Bob Baffert in that order.
Yeah, I mean, one of the metrics that I like to look at is one that they don't provide you, but you could do some quick math. I like to divide the earnings by the number of starts just to see, the overall quality, or the best sense that I can get of the overall quality that a stable put out among all their starters. And if you look at it that way, I don't think it's any surprise that Bob Baffert absolutely stands out from the competition, just among the top 50 trainers by number of wins. If you divide, their earnings by their number of starts, Bob Baffert's at $60,000 and Chad Brown is second with $22,000. I mean, that's because Bob Baffert basically has a stable of stakes horses and not much else. And the others have more of a range of quality from top to bottom. So you're going to get that kind of result. Bob Baffert, I mean, you know, say what you will about whether you're a fan of his stable or his horses, but I think he has to be, for me, considered the leading candidate for this award, just based on accomplishments. I mean, he leads the charge with 15 grade one wins. That was not just accomplished with one horse. He had a number of horses in many different categories winning grade one races. So, I mean, Bob Baffert makes a lot of sense. I can't really fault Chad Brown as a pick. He had a solid year for any top trainer. Not like he did last year when he had Bricks and Mortar campaigned as Horse of the Year and many other grade one winners, but he's definitely in the running, as is Brad Cox. I guess if I was going to talk about some other trainers that had notable years for them, I'd point to Mike Maker, who only achieved 3 grade one wins, but he did have 14 graded stakes wins overall. He's right up there towards the top of the earners list. And it just, he had very strong meets in New York. He was right there for the Saratoga training title. And also Bill Mott, who I was kind of surprised when I looked at earnings per start. He was 4th on the list behind Bob Baffert, Chad Brown, and Brad Cox. And he had 4 grade one wins, a number of graded stakes wins, a solid year for him. Just not sure it's enough to make him the winner of the trainer award.
Yeah, I've got no problem with Bob Baffert. And in the end, when I do a little deeper dive, I may very well go with him. He obviously had a strong year, and we still have the Malibu where he has Charlatan coming back. I haven't checked the La Brea to see who's in there. So I really don't think you could go wrong picking any of those top 4. It's just a matter of what you put the most stock in, whether it's, the biggest wins at the top competition or how many good graded stakes horses you have, or just how many races you win around the country. So there's no clear cut criteria, and it's just kind of beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I think.
Now, as far as the Jockey Award goes, I know I have a take on it, but I'm interested to see how you're looking at it, Craig, because I think that there are a number you can consider, kind of like the Trainer Award, but personally, I see 2 that I could narrow it down to.
Well, I'll be curious to hear your take, because I had it narrowed down to 3. It's obviously Irad Ortiz, using that same algorithm I talked about. He kind of stands out above the competition. But again, I do want to take a look at the individual horses, because that does matter to me when I make my vote. And then the other 2 would be Joel Rosario and also Luis Saez, who I think kind of is under the radar a little bit. He just doesn't have that name, but he rode some really good horses this year, won a lot of big races. So tentatively, the way I have him penciled in is Irad Ortiz, Luis Saez, and Joel Rosario.
Yeah, I would have the same 3. I think Irad Ortiz and Joel Rosario, for me, are a cut above, just looking at the number of graded stakes wins overall and grade one wins. Joel Rosario does somewhat surprisingly lead all jockeys among grade one wins this year, and he did win them on many different horses for different stables, so I do want to give him credit for that. Irad Ortiz wasn't the best year that he's ever had, but he's obviously right up in there. He's kind of like Chad Brown in the trainer category, another solid year for him, but certainly not a standout like he's been in some previous years. And Luis Saez, he's right up there. When I look at the earnings per start metric that I was talking about, Joel Rosario is number 1 on that list. And Irad Ortiz is actually 3rd. Luis Saez drops down to 6th. He probably didn't ride in quite as many graded stakes races as those other 2 did. But for me, I would make those my top 3. I would have Luis Saez solidly in 3rd. And I have to decide between Irad and Joel. And for me, I'm leaning towards Joel Rosario because, Irad Ortiz, he had a good year for him, but I think Joel Rosario, for the kind of rider that he is, had an exceptional year. And just looking at the fact that he won 11 grade one races, was pretty close up there on the earnings list to the top, despite having fewer mounts than Irad. I think it's an award to give him. And also, I don't want to get too much into personal impressions that go aside from the data, but Irad Ortiz gets a lot of great mounts, and Joel Rosario rides for many different barns. It's not like he's a stable rider for one guy like Irad can be with Chad Brown, although Irad does ride for other barns as well. I want to give him credit for that. But Joel Rosario earned his grade one victories with some amazing rides, and I do want to give credit for that. So he'd be my winner in this category.
Yeah, I've got no problem with Joel. In fact, I voted for him last year, and maybe I have a little guilt about that because Irad was such a landslide winner last year as the top rider. So, and Joel did have a better year this year than he did last year. So maybe you swayed me. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to give it a deeper look. I admittedly did not spend as much time on the humans as I did on the equine part of this just yet. Partly because we still have some big races to be run, and a couple of them are close calls for me. But I think we have the top three nailed down pretty good.
Yeah, and as far as the owners go, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because you already said to me beforehand that you want to look at it a little bit more, and I do too. I will just say, as a point of general philosophy with the owner and breeder award, I tend to go more with owners and breeders that had multiple horses rather than just one good horse. So you won't find me casting a vote for the combination of Spendthrift, My Racehorse, Madigat, and Starlight Racing that campaigned Authentic. I would, or Sakatoga Stable, who just campaigned Tis the Law. I would look more towards owners that had multiple good horses in their barns, and there are many from which to choose. I don't have a top three singled out just yet. I have a few that I'm considering, like Klarovich, who won last year, Godolphin, Three Diamonds. They're the leaders in earnings per start among those with the most wins, but there are definitely others to consider. So I would look at a few different metrics, but kind of use that kind of philosophy at outfits that had success across the board.
Yeah, and the tough thing for me with owners, and the reason I said I need to take some more time, is there's so many partnerships out here. I got to look back and see how, if somebody's half owner of one horse and full owner of another, how much credit do they get for the half? And I really want to ask some people about that. And it's actually really hard data to get because we don't get stats presented to us like that. We get them all listed separately. Every single partnership is listed separately if they're not exactly the same. So it's going to take some work, but I do want to put some time into it and give it a look.
Well, I don't know if you have any thoughts about apprentice jockey or breeder. I'm not really prepared to talk about either one yet. I'll make decisions, obviously, and look at the data, but they're not ones that I've really dived into to form opinions yet. The apprentice jockey is always tough, and especially this year when there obviously was not a clear standout.
Yeah, I mean, I did give that one a look. I'm probably going to side with Alexander Crispin to win that one. I actually think Luis Cardenas is the best apprentice out there by far, to be honest, just based on where he rides. But he'll probably win that award next year, would be my guess. I think he still has some time left. You can comment on that. I think you know more about that than I would. But that's where I landed. There is a guy. Carrera, who's been riding in Ohio mostly, who has the most wins. And generally, that's where I side with. But in this case, it's just a lot of those wins were racked up at Mountaineer, Thistledown, Mahoning Valley. And I just think the racing in Maryland and Delaware, where Crispin has been winning, is just on a much higher level. So I gave him a little more extra credit.
Yeah, I'll come out and say I'm not familiar with all of the riders in this category. I'll probably go and watch some of their biggest wins to see if I can just, get a sense of what kinds of riders they are, just to get a brief sample of that before I cast my ballot. But I would be considering the same ones that you mentioned. The one other rider that I would throw in there is Charlie Marquez, who had some success in the Mid-Atlantic region, has won races on the New York circuit since coming here. So he's one that I would consider. I agree with you about Luis Cardenas. I think he's shown a lot of promise, but doesn't quite have the credentials to win this award yet. So we'll see what happens in the future, but I want to do a little more research first.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I have Charlie Marquez second, so.
All right, well, that's the end of our Eclipse Award discussion for this week, and I think that might be it for our podcast this week because we're not planning to record one on Christmas, which is this upcoming Friday. So no TimeformUS forecast this week. We'll see about next week for doing a Pacecast. I've got to talk to Craig about that, but we'll decide and tweet that out when we have that information. If we don't talk to you before then everybody have a happy holiday, and I'll wish you guys a premature Happy New Year as well. And thanks for listening throughout the year. I know that we have a lot of fun doing this.
Yeah, Happy New Year's, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is you celebrate. Enjoy your time in this, what's been a really rough year.
And I also want to give a special shout out to Craig. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning this, but I just got my first Christmas gift in the mail today, and it is from my podcast co-host. It is a Bon Raison Breeders' Cup hat. I will cherish it forever. So thank you for that, Craig.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum channel. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a great holiday season.